war over the future of the Democratic Party, it is raging right now in California, where with the party's progressive wing pushing for an unprecedented wealth tax on billionaires and moderates in the party vigorously pushing back. And the background of this is I'm sure a lot of y'all are well aware of the wealth inequality that exists in America. At least, anecdotally, but going into the numbers, as of 2022, the top 10% of families held nearly 70% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% of families held just 3%. It's so bad that you have historians often comparing it to the Gilded Age of the late 19th, early 20th century. California, while being the least affordable state and suffering from a widening budget deficit, it's also home to more billionaires than any other state. And so that has led to some going, hey, why don't we just take some of that wealth from the billionaires and use it to fix some of our problems? And so in walks in this proposal, which would make anyone with a net worth above $1 billion pay a one-time tax equal to 5% of their assets. With that, applying retroactively to anyone living in the state as of the new year, and the payment would be due in 2027. So there would also be the option of paying it in installments over 5 years, but then you'd have to pay more in total. And things like real estate, pensions, and retirement accounts would be excluded. Now, if you caught wind of this story from right-wing media, you'd probably get the impression that this policy is actually being pushed by radical left governor Gavin Newsom.
Why would a Newsom, the governor of California, even think about this idea of...
Gavin Newsom, of course, wants a wealth tax.
And that's sort of like what Gavin Newsom is doing. All of you need to pay more taxes, but not pointing any fingers at himself.
But here's the reality. Newsom passionately opposes this tax because he claims that it's going to drive billionaires out of the state and hurt California's economy. In fact, Newsom has smothered previous wealth tax proposals in their cribs before, and he's promised to veto any such bill that reaches his desk. But also I'll say this latest proposal, it's different because it's coming from a healthcare workers union and not state lawmakers. So rather than going through the legislature, they're trying to pass it as a ballot initiative this November. And reportedly, they've already begun collecting the nearly 900,000 signatures that they need to get it there. But still, you had Newsom telling the New York Times yesterday that he has been relentlessly working behind the scenes to snuff this thing out and that he'd fight the measure if it reached the ballot.
So there is a wealth tax proposal in California that I think you are adamantly against.
Yes, I am.
And we have a mayor that's coming here in New York who would like to have a wealth tax if he could. You couldn't be more diametrically opposed.
Yeah, well, I want to be a Big Ten party. It's about addition, not subtraction.
Right, but here's where the war over the party's future is happening, right? Because others disagree with that big tent idea. And so, for example, you have Senator Elizabeth Warren, who argued in a speech to the National Press Club that Democrats need to be more progressive, not less.
Revising our economic agenda to tiptoe around that conclusion might appeal to the wealthy, but it will not help Democrats build a bigger tent. And it definitely will not help Democrats win elections. By definition, the top 0.1% of the economic ladder doesn't have a lot of votes. So when the question is raised whether Democrats should build our tent by sucking up to the rich, it's sure not about attracting their votes. It's about attracting their money.
But with all this, you have Newsom saying ideological diversity, it's actually our strength, not our weakness, and that different Democrats appeal to different constituencies.
We recognize it's important to focus on growth, but also focus on inclusion. We have pre-distribution Democrats, we have redistribution Democrats, and therein lies the dialectic, and therein lies the debate within the Democratic Party. So much punditry has been done about, well, is the future of the party Mandami? At the same election that occurred, well, is the future, of Virginia? Is the future New Jersey?
But Warren's argument is that there's not enough room in the tent for all that.
The Democratic Party cannot pursue both visions at the same time. Either we politely nibble around the edges of change, or we throw ourselves into the fight. Either we carefully craft our policies to ensure that the rich keep right on getting richer, or we build a party that ferociously and unapologetically serves the needs of working people.
Now with all this, you have Newsom conceding that he might feel differently about a national wealth tax, but he argues that a state level one, just one in California, it's simply impractical.
You can't isolate yourself from the 49 others. We're in a competitive environment. People have this simple luxury, particularly people of that status, they already have 2 or 3 homes outside the state. It's a simple issue.
Now, at least anecdotally, we have seen some billionaires making moves to relocate to states like Florida and Texas before the January 1st deadline, supposedly to evade the tax just in case it passes. Right, with those, including the likes of, if this video gets suppressed, you know why, Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, venture capitalist Peter Thiel, and possibly Oracle founder Larry Ellison. In fact, Thiel donated $3 million to a committee opposing the tax, and that's expected to be the first of several major contributions from Silicon Valley leaders hoping to quash it. Some sources also telling the Times that they estimate that more than $75 million is going to ultimately go toward that effort. Also, others are playing around with the idea of putting their own tax-related initiatives on the ballot just to confuse voters. But also, I'll say there appear to be people in this tax bracket who don't seem to care that much, including NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who is now one of the wealthiest men on earth.
We work in Silicon Valley because that's where the talent pool is. Whatever taxes, I guess, they would like to apply, so be it. Maybe I'm perfectly fine with it.
Now, with all this, right, in the middle, you have California's nonpartisan legislative analysts and the governor's Department of Finance saying that the tax could result in hundreds of millions of dollars in losses from income tax revenue per year if wealthy residents leave. But they also estimated that the tax itself would probably deliver tens of billions of dollars in one-time money for California. So it's a short-term versus long-term thing. And so with all that, you have the healthcare worker union's chief of staff telling the Times that the concern is overblown, saying the overwhelming majority of billionaires have chosen to stay in California past the January 1st deadline, saying only a very small percentage left before the deadline, despite weeks of Chicken Little talking points claiming a modest tax would trigger a mass departure. And with that, she argued that Donald Trump's cuts to Medicaid, food assistance, and Affordable Care Act subsidies made a wealth tax definitely necessary if it wasn't already. And so with this, under the proposal, 90% of the revenue from the tax would go toward healthcare, with the rest then going to food assistance and education. But as far as Newsom, you have him telling the Times that this will be defeated, saying there's no question in my mind, and adding, I'll do what I have to do to protect the state. And, ultimately, we'll have to see if he's right, especially as it's not just him versus the union in this upcoming fight. Or because you have people like Representative Ro Khanna, who, like Newsom's, being considered a potential 2028 presidential candidate, throwing his support behind the tax. With Khanna writing in a recent viral post, I echo what FDR said with sarcasm of economic royalists when they threatened to leave. I will miss them very much. And adding, my district is $18 trillion, nearly 1/3 of US stock market in a 50-mile radius. Saying we have 5 companies with a market cap over $1 trillion companies. If I can stand up for a billionaire tax, this is not a hard position for 434 other members or 100 senators. AI was created with our tax dollars. ImageNet was created by Fei-Fei Li at Stanford using NSF money. This was a visual database. Hinton presented at an ImageNet conference his famous paper. The seminal innovation in tech is done by thousands, often with public funds. NSF, DARPA, Stanford, Berkeley, San Jose State, Santa Clara, and the UCs are the foundation for what has made Silicon Valley a powerhouse. It's why we won 5 Nobel Prizes this year on the UC system. And adding, we cannot have a nation with extreme concentration of wealth in a few places, but where 70% of Americans believe the American dream is dead and healthcare, childcare, housing, education is unaffordable. What will stifle American innovation, what will make us fall behind China, is if we see further political dysfunction and social unrest, if we fail to cultivate the talent in every American and in every city and town. So yes, a billionaire tax is good for American innovation, which depends on a strong and thriving American democracy. But also now, reportedly, a loose collection of Silicon Valley executives are mobilizing on WhatsApp chats and conference calls to oust Khanna over his support for this tax. Though we will have to see what happens there, right? He easily won his last election, and he's currently sitting on a very comfy $15 million campaign cushion. Plus, this sort of effort could backfire since he could play the billionaires are trying to take me down card. And in fact, it already appears that he's doing that in his recent fundraising emails.